Well, this is what happens when you're home alone over a period of time. You stay in your pajamas, and I'm going to read to you today from my pajamas. Chapter 15, Building a Life. Pam lay in bed thinking. She had decided that the first step in building her new life was to get her high school equivalency diploma. She was apprehensive about studying after all these years, but excited about her new opportunities. The community volunteers at the center provided the support, encouragement, and network she needed. She knew she could stay there until she was able to sustain herself. Tomorrow, armed with suggestions from her friends at the center, she would begin. She turned over, smiled, and was soon fast asleep. The next day, Pam walked the short distance to the city library. Many of the books she needed to get started were at the center, but she felt drawn to go to the library. As she walked through the large doors, she looked around. Mothers were reading to their small children. Several older people were absorbed in searching the rows of books. Off to one corner, two individuals sat next to a window. A small bundle lay at the feet of one, and the other had a backpack tucked away between its legs. She knew that these two belonged to the homeless population and that all of their possessions were in the bag, in the bundle. She remembered spending time in libraries to find a break from life on the street. She gazed down at her list. Better get started, she thought. Pam took her notebook and began walking toward the rows of books. All 3 books she needed were on the shelves. Well, that wasn't too difficult, she thought, as she carried them through the last row. As Pam approached a table, she noticed a young woman tucked behind a bookshelf, sitting in a comfortable chair. The young woman seemed deep in thought. A book opened in her lap. Jerry had also gone to the city library today. She was making substantial headway. Her professors had given her options to catch up on her missed classes and assignments. She didn't know if she could focus enough to do the work, but had decided to take this first step. She sat in a big cozy chair off by herself in the corner of the library. Right now, it was not going so well. Jerry had closed her eyes and leaned back. The feeling of despair seemed to be snowballing her, carrying her away. She didn't have the strength to stop it. Her mind tumbled and rolled. Pam laid her books down on the table and sat in the chair, quietly slid up to the table. She opened the first book and began to read. Something drew her attention back to the young woman. It was apparent to Pam from the energy around her that the woman was in pain. Mentally, Pam began to direct her spiritual friends to clear the energy and to relieve the young woman's discomfort. What she had called a spiritual healing the other night in her conversation with Dr. James. Suddenly, Jerry felt a shift. It was like a beam of light shining bright and steady through a dense fog. Everywhere the beam touched, the density cleared and a sense of lightness remained. Jerry looked up in surprise. Her eyes met Pam's gaze. They exchanged smiles, and the woman went back to her book. How strange, Jerry thought. I feel so different, puzzling. She picked up her book to start again. Several times during the next few hours, the apprehension started to pull her down into the density, and somehow, almost as soon as Jerry felt it, the heaviness lifted. Maybe she could handle these classes after all. Pam smiled at the young woman as she got up to leave. Somehow she seemed familiar, but Pam wasn't sure why. Chapter 16, Synergy. As she dressed for yet another day of study, Pam thought of the young woman at the library. She had been there each time Pam had studied this week. They had smiled their recognition, and today Pam decided to stretch. Her goal was to start a conversation and at least get to know the woman's name. She'd noticed that they seemed to gravitate to similar study areas. There was something very comfortable about this person. She skipped down the stairs up the stairs to the library's glass front double doors and entered. Oh, the air conditioning felt so good. Inside, she paused and looked around to see if the familiar face was there. Yes, over in the corner at a table. The woman was writing. She seemed intent. Pam made her way to the table and sat down. Immediately, she felt the troubled energy. She quieted herself, opened her book as if to read, and then called to her spiritual friends to clear the density. She held that focus for several minutes until she had a sense of completion. Then she looked up. Their eyes met, the azure blue and the dark brown. Hi, Pam said. You seem to be here about as often as I am. Are you studying for classes too? Jerry smiled slowly. Yes, I have some makeup work to do for college. This is a quiet place to do it. And you? Oh, I'm getting ready to take the test for my GED. I was about 3 months short of graduating when I stopped. Now I'm ready to move ahead. Good luck with that, Jerry responded, and then went back to her book. Thanks. Pam began her study, waiting for the next opening. 3 more times, Pam noticed the energy begin to get heavy. She glanced up and again called for clearing. When the woman looked up at the clock, Pam decided it was time to risk. I'm new here, Pam ventured, and I've decided it's time for me to stop being such a loner. I was going to get soup and salad at the little deli down the street. Would you like to join me? I'd love to have the company. Jerry thought quickly. She had been intrigued by their meetings and the safety she felt with this woman. Why, sure, I hadn't thought about eating out. Let me call home and tell my mom of my change, and then I'd love to join you. Great, Pam smiled. By the way, my name is Pam. I'm Jerry. It's good to have a name to go with the face, she smiled. Be right back. She gathered her books into her backpack and walked to the library's lobby to use her cell phone. Pam had finished the chapter and gathered her things by the time Jerry returned. All set, said Jerry. She lifted her backpack to her shoulder, and the two walked out into the summer sun. You know, I've appreciated your quieting effect, Jerry said. This has been a tough time for me. I didn't know if I could do my makeup work. Somehow you've made it easier. That may sound a bit crazy to you, but I mean it as a thank you. Oh, I do understand, Pam said. I've gone through some pretty intense times myself. Maybe what I do as I calm myself somehow affects others around me. They chatted as they walked the short distance to the deli. Once inside, they found a cozy booth near a window and laid their books out of the way. They walked to the front counter and surveyed the menu, each deep in thought. How much to say? How much to interact with this new situation? Pam ordered her soup and salad and carried her coffee back to the table. Jerry finally decided on the lunch special, walked back to the table and placed her number next to Pam's. She sat down and sipped her soda. You know, it was scary for me to decide to invite you to lunch, said Pam, but I'm really glad that I did. It's been hard for me to trust people. Something in my life that I'm learning to do differently. Bingo! Another thing we have in common, besides favorite study nooks, laughed Jerry. I've had my doubts about the human race for a long time. If you learn how to do it differently, let me know. Until their food came, they talked about the madness they each had observed and then about small things. Pam asked questions about the town and Jerry asked about Pam's plan. Through the meal, they chatted comfortably and yet avoiding any probing conversations. As they finished their lunch, Jerry asked where Pam was staying. Pam hesitated. The center. It's been a lifesaver, a real lifesaver. You've got to be kidding. I have a friend who works there. Maybe you've met him, Dr. Rory James. The information sent chills through Pam's body. Rory's friend. Why, of course. She's the friend he had mentioned. Now she knew why she had felt so strongly to study for her GED at the city library. It was to meet Jerry.